Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's episode, we are firmly in list season. We've had several major top 100 prospect lists or top 101 prospect lists come out in the last week or so. And we're going to dive into those as Baseball America and Baseball Prospectus release their rankings with a strong presence from the Orioles organization. We're also going to break down MLB Pipeline's positional rankings as they get ready to release their own top 100 prospects list. But first, as we like to do at the top of all of our episodes, we have some new members of our Patreon community to welcome. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bob.
Yes, we're 3 weeks away from spring training, which is crazy to say. We're starting to see more people get excited about baseball. Got 3 new signups. Always appreciative, and always apologies if my pronunciations are wrong. But first up was Callie Arrutia, who is a Marlins fan, but he's moving to the area and wants to adopt the Orioles as his American League team. I'm all about that. And, might have been able to pick another organization that isn't too painful in recent years, but the Orioles are on an upswing. So hopefully that can offset some Marlins trauma, because he also has a Marlins podcast called Battered Marlins Fans. And yeah, hey, Trey Mancini signed with the Marlins, so there's the connection already. He's bringing it from Florida up to Baltimore. Next up, we have Jerome Marshall. He signed up single A for a year straight up. Love when people do that. And Elijah Ginsberg also did that. He went straight to double A, and that is Elijah Ginsberg, the same one from our fellow Believe Orioles podcast on the Believe Podcast Network, The Warehouse. So yeah, really appreciate that. Give those guys a listen too. They're very smart and know what they're talking about. At some point we'll have to team up down the line as fellow believers.
We'll dive in first to the Baseball America list as they release their top 100 prospect rankings. And with little surprise, Jackson Holliday checks in at number 1. It has now been 3 straight years for the Orioles having a number 1 prospect atop Baseball America's preseason top 100 list, as Holliday follows Adley Rutzman in 2022 and Jackson Holliday in 2023. The other 5 players from the Orioles organization to make the list include catcher Samuel Basallo at number 10, Kobe Mayo at 25th, Heston Kjerstad 41st, Colton Cowser 34th, and DL Hall, who by Baseball America's standards is still prospect eligible, coming in at 93. Baseball America and their team, as usual, do a lot of excellent work. And certainly if you're a subscriber, go over and check that out at baseballamerica.com. If you're not a subscriber, think about getting that for probably the industry standard for prospect coverage for a long time. So, Nick, I'll start with you here. I think we knew the Orioles have a strong farm system with a lot of top players in it. But what does the fact they land with 6 after seeing several notable graduations say about this organization?
The talent pipeline remains pretty strong. Basallo up there in competition for potentially being the next number 1 prospect in all of baseball at some point. But I mean, you had 6, which was tied for the most among every other organization. So that's obviously a positive to see there. Even if you take away like DL Hall, who probably shouldn't be on this list anymore. I know Baseball America has their strict standards they stick to as far as like innings and at bats or whatever, but that's why he's still there. But even then, I think Joey Ortiz was like just missed their list. So he's going to be back on their top 100 at some point fairly early on. And honestly, I don't know if we were going to dive into this or not, but I just kind of add to the 6 that were there. What was most telling for me is I love the whole like week that Baseball America does here with all their extra articles that they do that surround the top 100 list, breaking down, the top tools and everything else. But the guys who they talk about who just missed their list, guys who received votes, I mean, that was an extremely long list of guys who were receiving votes. Enrique Bradfield, Chase McDermott, Seth Johnson, Cade Povich, Connor Norby, Dylan Beavers. I think I missed some. I didn't even get everybody. I was trying to find the list real quick, and I couldn't see it. It's like 10 deep of guys who at least received a vote. I don't know how many other teams had that many guys who just missed the list, but That is a whole slew of players. Actually, I found it here really quick. Yeah, Connor Norby, Enrique Bradfield, Chase McDermott, Dylan Beaver, Seth Johnson, Cade Povich all received votes for the top 100. So
obviously Joey
yeah.
Ortiz as well.
And Joey Ortiz.
Who
Yeah,
just
so
missed, yeah.
stacked. But we knew that.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting that Ortiz and Norby fell off, maybe just because with the new international guy from the Padres getting on there and the new draft picks. But like you said, they'll be back on there as soon as there's some graduations early in the season. You would assume. Yeah, it's just really cool. DL Hall, if we can get into that for a second. I mean, I know he can still be like the Josh Hader type closer, multi-inning reliever, or even a starter. Maybe if the Orioles don't make a trade or sign someone for the starting rotation, he could really try to earn that fourth or fifth starter's role in spring training. But yeah, it's weird that they don't go by the innings, they only go by the innings / at bats and not by time on active roster. But it is what it is. It's 5 top 50 guys, including 2 in the top 10. I put on our TikTok and YouTube Shorts pages, if you want to check those out, some clips from the Baseball America Future Projections podcast when they were talking about Holliday and Basallo. They're very excited about these guys just as much as we are. Basallo, like, he's the one that I think there was an article they had about who could be the number 1 next year, and Basallo was a candidate. And wouldn't that be something? 4 for 4. Let's continue to stretch this record and make sure it's never broken. But yeah, just really cool to see these guys up there. It's no real surprises. I think, Cowser, I think there was a lot of good stuff about him that I saw this week as far as how hard he hits the ball. Oh, that's the one thing I really wanted to talk about was the exit velocities, the average exit velocities of all the position player prospects on the list. The Orioles had all their guys were like in the top 20 to top 21. I think the lowest was Basallo at 90.1 average or 90.3 or something like that. He was just under the top 20 at 18 years old. So yeah, even Holliday was up there in like the top 20% of all the top 100 prospects. So we hit the ball hard here in Baltimore.
I'm going to focus on Holliday for a minute, and we've talked a lot about Holliday over the last year or so, and for good reason. He's, I think, at this point, the consensus top prospect in the game. But Nick, as you look at him as a prospect, do you feel like he's really scratched the surface yet of the kind of player he can be?
Nope. Not even a little bit. This is part of what we've talked about a lot in the past. It's like Jackson Holliday, when he was the pick, I think we were kind of like, all right, not who we were expecting. And then over the years, it's always been like, yeah, he's good. But then, I mean, you have like Fangraphs, Baseball America, Pipeline. I mean, you have so many other outlets, and just not even guys who write for these national outlets, but prominent, prospect evaluators. We all follow on Twitter. Like, they're really hyping up Jackson Holliday as like the future top prospect in all of baseball. And I always felt like we were always the lower guys on Holliday for all this time. And now you just look at some of the numbers, and if you look at Baseball America also released their top 30 individual team list today, and you go through Holliday's scouting report. Shout out John Mioli for these amazing reports as always. But I mean, his hard hit rate was 45.5% this past year. That was up from 34.6% in his pro debut. His 90th percentile exit velo went from 99.4 miles per hour to 102.5 miles per hour. He's still like got the baby face and is still not this. Look at his dad. He's going to get bigger. I can't remember what I was listening to, or was that the Baseball America, the future projection? They were talking about this. Like, he's going to get a lot bigger. We saw it last year. I'm anxious to see what he looks like out there in the field this year. He's still at 19, 20 years old. As he grows into that power, I think that's going to start to really shine through. I don't think he's going to end up being a guy who is more like doubles oriented. I think that over the fence power, he started pulling the ball more. We saw that at the end of last year, especially when he got up to AAA, a lot of pull home runs. I think just that power, that over the fence power is going to really start to shine this year, whether it's in AAA or in the big leagues. Doesn't matter.
Completely agree. You saw the jump he made from when he was drafted till last year. Well, I just look at the videos of him. Like, he's been working hard this offseason. There's constantly videos of him. I think he was working out with Colton Cowser, and he's just crushing the ball poolside. Obviously, it's not the same as the in-game situation, but I think he's going to come in. He's already hitting the ball hard. He just needs to hit it in the air. I think the power is not a question for me. I feel like it's 25 plus per season home run power. The speed, 20 stolen bases a year. Like, he's probably going to be a more valuable fantasy baseball player than Gunnar Henderson if you play fantasy. But, we'll see who's the more valuable on the actual Orioles, which one will win an MVP first. But yeah, I am more and more. I think he's making the team out of spring training, actually. I'm getting that vibe. And I hope other players are able to have a chance to make it out of spring training as well, like Kobe Mayo, Colton Cowser, Heston Kjerstad. But there's not been any action in Major League Baseball. So maybe in spring training, some of that clutter will be sent out in a trade package at one point. But I think Holliday he's number one pretty much unanimously anywhere you look for a reason. And yeah, he's only going to get better. Obviously, he just turned 20 years old, and these guys improve pretty quickly when they're this young. So it's exciting.
We're going to touch on all of these names at some point tonight, but as we sort through the list, we're going to kind of take different things that are unique about each list. And in Baseball America's case, one thing that jumps out is DL Hall's inclusion. Baseball America, as I mentioned earlier, and Bob touched on as well, does have different eligibility standards in a lot of outlets, including ourselves. For us, if a player is no longer eligible for Rookie of the Year award, they are no longer a prospect. Baseball America, though, uses a little bit different criteria where they focus on time actually spent on the field and not days on the active roster. By that criteria, days on the active roster, Hall is not a prospect. But when you factor in that he has not thrown that many innings yet, he's still a prospect in Baseball America's eyes. So let's talk about him for a minute. And we're going to talk about him a lot in our next episode, which is going to focus on the Orioles pitching staff. But he's had his ups and downs, but we saw last year in the major leagues down the stretch what he's capable of doing. How do the two of you feel about his prospects going into this season and beyond?
I'm feeling really good about Hall. I feel like the way he ended last season out of the bullpen, late in the season, and then in the playoffs, he was like one of the only guys who was it was only 2 outings, but he pitched really good both times, and the walks were okay. And this is him with diminished stuff. I mean, we knew he didn't get that velocity completely back yet, and I think that'll probably be the thing in spring training. Everyone's going to want to see the velocity first time DL Hall gets out there, because I think he's going to be able to ramp it up, especially if he's focusing out of the bullpen to close to triple digits. And yeah, if he was pitching that well by hovering around the mid 90s, what's going to happen when he can get up in the upper 90s consistently? And I think bare minimum, he's like a shutdown reliever, whether it's closer or just multi-inning, late inning guy, high leverage guy. Like, he's going to have a lot of value. And I think relief pitchers kind of get the short shrift when it comes to prospect rankings. And obviously there's a reason for that, because they don't affect as much of a percentage of a game, and plus the fact that he could also still have a chance to start. We'll see what happens, but yeah, still high on Hall. He had the prospect fatigue. Now he's got the prospect second wind, I guess, according to Baseball America. And my son just asked a question in the chat: who's your favorite prospect? DL Hall right now would have to be, since I'm talking about him right this moment. But yeah, DL Hall, I'm still a fan.
Yeah, I would like to dive into him more in part 2 of this. If you're watching live, we'll get into that later tonight. If you're on the podcast feed, that'll come out Friday morning. But I think for right now, with Hall, since he's on the list, we got to talk about his prospect status. I think the positive for Hall going into this year, we can debate starter, reliever, and what that path is later on. But I think at the minimum, he showed that floor of shutdown, lights out, late inning reliever. He's shown that floor now over the parts of 2 seasons. And the other big question mark around Hall was the walks, obviously. That's been a big issue. And in the big leagues, he's been effective. Yeah, those were, 1 inning stints. Those were out of the bullpen, but still, he's shown an extremely high floor, and he's really cleaned up the walks, even if it was just in a relief role. So I think going into 2024, and I mean, the Orioles, we've talked about, they put a lot of time and energy and effort into ramping him back up, that deload process that he went through last year. And for him to work, even if it was a methodical pace, the Orioles believe in him so much that they were willing to do that with him. They got the velo back up eventually by the end of the year. And like Bob said, he was in the bullpen throwing gas. So arrows pointing back up for Hall. And I think regardless of what role you see him in, it's hard not to be excited about what he could potentially show us this year.
Before we go to baseball prospectus list, we do have a question in here from Richard on YouTube that I think is pretty interesting. We were just discussing it a little bit at the top of this segment. Joey Ortiz did not make Baseball America's list despite ranking 63rd mid-season. What are your guys' thoughts about that?
I don't get it either. Richard in the comments here. What did he do to fall that far? I don't know. I think, again, it's probably a little bit of prospect fatigue. Like, he's been around. He got a taste of the majors. Obviously, that wasn't like a real run or anything. He's a wizard defensively. Everyone knows that. He hits the ball hard. He could lift it more. He could chase less. But to me, the bat doesn't need to be excellent when you're that good of a defender. And I think his bat can be above average at the major league level if he's given a serious chance. To me, he's a top 100 prospect. I think he's right up there, closer to top 50 personally, just when I put together my personal top 100. But yeah, I think it's just prospect fatigue. Him and Connor Norby both. I mean, I think they've been in AAA a while. There's only so much you can say about someone and get excited about them. You're always looking for the new hotness. So yeah, unfortunately, I think that's the case, but he's still a great prospect, and he's almost 26. He's 25 this year. So it makes sense to, in a sense, but Michael Busch is 26 and he's still around 50-ish in a lot of prospects list as well, without the defensive abilities. So not really sure about that one.
Yeah. I think also it's just hard he came out of the draft as this all glove, no bat shortstop. And I think for maybe some like other outlets like Pipeline, like we were also talking about before we hopped on, they like to stick to those draft reports, and it's really hard for guys like Ortiz to kind of shake off those descriptions. And Ortiz has done it. And yeah, it wasn't a super successful stint in the major leagues, even though he didn't get a fair shake yet, but he still went back to AAA, and we finally saw a full season. Again, the health, that's been such a big thing. He had that major issue between the COVID season and the injury and just other injuries he's had. He's never had just that full run, and he finally got that at the AAA level, and he completely shook off that, all glove, no bat description that was placed on him coming out of the draft. And so I think, yes, in this Just Missed article that Baseball America put out, they said he's a double plus defender with an above average arm, and he's got the floor of a big leaguer, just defense alone. But I think it's like the hit. He doesn't have that elite hit tool like so many of these other guys do. And I think that's more flashy. And so when you're ranking these prospects, it's a lot easier to put the guy with the flashy hit tool or the 60 grade, 70 grade power over a guy like Ortiz, who, as much as we love him, I think on a team like the Orioles, who you expect to be World Series contenders every single year, like Ortiz is probably more along the lines of just that super utility type guy who gets a lot of playing time, but he's probably not the everyday starting shortstop or the everyday starting second baseman for the Orioles. And so maybe that knocks him down a little bit as well. I don't know.
Yeah, and before we get to this next question about Ortiz, I'll just add on to that I think players who have been in Ortiz's situation where they were viewed one way coming out of the draft, and then they have success, but they have some injuries along the way, have a harder bar to have a tougher climb in these rankings. It's going to be harder for them to make the list, and they're probably the most vulnerable to coming off the list because their success that got them there seemingly came out of nowhere, and no one knows whether or not to write it off as a fluke. I don't think it's a fluke in Ortiz's case, but he needs that extended run at the major leagues to prove it. And that goes now to this question from Callie, which is, do you see Ortiz as someone who is used as a trading piece, or do you think he fits into the Orioles' long-term plans, especially with the congestion in terms of bats and really up the middle with infielders? I would add there too.
I think it could go either way. I think he's either a headline piece in a semi-smaller trade if you're looking at like one of the, I think I saw today that the Mariners might be back in on the idea of signing Blake Snell and trading one of their younger guys like a Bryce Miller or Brian Wu. I think Ortiz could headline a trade like that, maybe like Ortiz and Norby or something along those lines. And I think he's a very, very solid second piece in a very big trade. Like if it's Kjerstad, Ortiz, and a couple others for your guy Luzardo down there in Miami. I could also see him being that utility guy. Like he's a starting everyday shortstop for the majority of teams out there. I feel like at least half the teams, I feel like he could be that. But for the Orioles, I think he could have a place. Like Ramon Arias, when the Orioles were transitioning from bad to good, he was a guy that would get 400 or 500 at bats in a couple seasons there by not necessarily being the everyday guy, but being second base, third base, shortstop. Like just get in where you fit in. If there's an injury, you fill in. If someone needs a day off, if you need a defensive replacement late in the game, I think he could easily be that guy with like Mayo, Gunnar, Holliday in the infield, and then you have Ortiz roving around as you move guys around as well. But Westberg could be that guy as well, minus the shortstop. He could probably play it in a pinch, but yeah, it's really tough right now. And it's why we keep expecting a trade, because there are so many guys that could fill so many different roles. So the flexibility, veterans, prospects, rookies, it's very congested, as Callie says, and it would be nice to clear some of that up and take care of some other needs at the same time. I still have faith that that's going to happen before the season starts.
I just think, yeah, there are probably some teams out there who view Ortiz as a definite upgrade over who they're going to roll out at shortstop or second base on opening day as of right now. And he could be an attractive trade piece. But at the same time, I kind of feel like, from trying to think from the Orioles perspective, like let's say the bat doesn't show out as much as we think it can at the major league level. That defense, we've been saying this for years and years and years, like everybody highlights it because it's true. The term elite gets thrown around a lot. I know, I get that, but it truly is elite shortstop defense. And so I think, yeah, I think just at his floor, right? Mateo, like, okay, if you want to keep him around for another year, whatever, that's fine, whatever. But I feel like at his floor, keeping Joey Ortiz in the organization is something that I imagine the Orioles would love to do because of that defense. And the bat is at least like, that's, even if it doesn't produce as much as we think it can, it's better than Mateo. I think he could have a more consistent bat maybe than Ramon Arias and give you that elite defense at two different positions. So I think even if he just becomes that utility type guy, that's an extremely valuable player to have on your roster. It's an upgrade over a potential upgrade over what the Orioles are rolling out right now as, backup infield types. So I think that also kind of makes the Orioles a little bit more hesitant to be so eager to move him. But at the same time, like Bob has said, if he's over there going to get you a frontline starter as a secondary piece, even, it makes a lot of sense. I get it.
We'll go now to baseball prospectus list in just a moment, but it's interesting to see the different thought processes in play here, as there's at least one notable difference on BP's list.
Yeah, you gotta think differently when looking at all these different lists. And list season's got me exhausted. And with list season coming up, and I don't know about you guys, but baseball season right around the corner as well, I've been worried about not having enough energy to stay on top of work and family responsibilities, keeping up with two toddlers running around the house, and then dedicating enough time to produce the amount of content that we do. But as you all know, I've stayed on my Magic Mind routine. These small, all-natural energy shots are super easy to use. They really do taste great, have helped me cut out the afternoon coffee. And now that our content schedule is ramped back up again, I haven't been worried about finding enough energy for late night recordings and writing. Magic Mind makes me more productive and more focused. I get more done in less time thanks to the nootropics inside that improve attention, concentration, and cognition, all without the jittery side effects. With all natural ingredients like matcha and lion's mane mushrooms, I would really encourage everyone listening to try it out as well if you're having trouble being at 100% some days. It's been a game changer for me, and I think it can be a game changer for everyone listening as well. And only during the month of January, so you got another week here, Magic Mind is helping you crush your 2024 New Year's resolutions fully focused. Everyone listening can get 1 month for free when you subscribe for 3 months at magicmind.com/JANOTV and use our exclusive code OTV20. It's an extra 20% off, which gets you up to 75% off. This only lasts until the end of January, so hurry up before it's gone. It's magicmind.com/JANOTV and use our code OTV20 for additional savings.
We go over now to Baseball Prospectus list. Just like Baseball America, BP has 6 Orioles in their top 101, with Jackson Holliday coming in first overall. What's interesting, though, as you go down the list, some of the differences. Samuel Basallo, 13th. Kobe Mayo, 15th. So Mayo, 10 spots higher on Baseball Prospectus list than he was on Baseball America's. They have Heston Kjerstad over Colton Cowser. Kjerstad coming in 41st. Cowser, 51st. And rounding out the trio of Orioles outfielders on this list is number 82, Enrique Bradfield. I want to start with Bradfield because I look at Bradfield as really kind of the starter set for a top 100 prospect. 2 tools that grade out as elite in speed and defense. Speed is coming back around, it seems, in baseball. Excellent plate approach. The question, though, has been about the bat, which is why I think that he's fallen short so far on some lists. But I got to hand it to Baseball Prospectus for considering him because I feel like it's not going to be too far into the 2024 season as outlets start updating their lists that you're starting to see Bradfield pop up in like that 85 or 90 to 100 range. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I personally agree. I think he's probably never, unless he really improves the bat, like messing around with the swing, getting a little more consistent impact with the bat. I doubt he'll ever be like a top 50, top 25 guy, but it seems perfect for like the bottom half of a top 100 list just because the floor is so high. Like, he's going to be a major leaguer. There's no doubt in my mind, unless there's a catastrophic injury in place, he's going to play in the major leagues in his career, just point blank, just defense speed alone. And then if he can, and he's got a great eye as well. So like, there's certainly skills there, even if he's like a 250 slap hitter that gets on base a little bit more than average and plays excellent center field, which he does, and has plus elite speed, which he does, then yeah, you're a major leaguer. Then if you're a guaranteed major leaguer, you should probably be on the top 100 prospect list, in my opinion. So yeah, it's cool that they put him here. I expect he'll be on other lists, if not now, then soon in 2024, at least 2025. So yeah, I was certainly happy to see him. It's always cool when there's like a surprise or two and it's not just the same names rolling out over and over again as well. And I would assume, I didn't see like who just missed their list, but I'm assuming Ortiz and Norby would be guys that were pretty close to rounding out the top 100 here as well.
Yeah, I mean, future Gold Glove center fielder is what I'm reading right here on go back to Baseball America's report. Sorry, Baseball Prospectus. But I mean, this is a guy who, if his floor is Gold Glove center fielder with who hits like 240, I mean, he's going to get on base at what, 330, 340 clip. He had a 2% whiff rate last year in this report. So if you throw this guy a strike, he's not going to miss that. He's going to make contact. It is just a matter of the quality of contact with Bradfield. And so if you've already got the 80 grade field, you've already got the 80 grade run. So stolen bases, speed, the defense, that's all there. This organization, we just talked about Joey Ortiz, the all glove, no bat coming out of the draft. And look at him. Look at his AAA offensive numbers that he put up. With Bradfield, they may never come. The Orioles may not need it to come, to be totally honest. But if I have a lot of confidence in what this organization is going to be able to do with that swing and with his batted ball data, I think it's going to look a lot better this year. I could imagine halfway through the season, we're getting the John Mealy article that's diving into the data, and we're seeing the progression that Bradfield has made. He's lifting the ball more. He's driving the ball more. The exit velo. I mean, Kobe Mayo, Joey Ortiz, Colton Cowser, Heston Kjerstad. Look at all these guys. They're 90th percentile EV jumps, like 2-3 miles per hour. Some of these guys 4 miles per hour last year. Bradfield isn't this jacked up guy like Kobe Mayo or Heston Kjerstad is, but if you can add just a little bit to that and just raise that hit tool just ever so slightly, yeah, his path to the major leagues is wide open, and it won't take him long to get there at all.
If Christian Pache and Victor Robles can be like best prospect in baseball guys, then I think Bradfield could be a top 100 guy. Come on.
Focusing on outfielders, they have Kjerstad, as I mentioned, ahead of Cowser by 10 spots. On a recent episode, we talked about those players in the context of the Orioles' crowded outfield situation. And I believe that you both said that if you had to give up one of them in a trade to get a pitcher, you would deal Kjerstad before you would deal Cowser, because Cowser's all-around skill set is a little bit better than Kjerstad's. Kjerstad, though, as I look at the two players, has that one loud tool, which is the power. And Cowser, I don't think really has anything in his skill set that comes close to that. So I'm kind of two thoughts here, which is that it is possible, if not likely, that Cowser has a better major league career. And that's why on my own list right now, he ranks ahead of Kjerstad. But I could also see where you would put Kjerstad in front of him because of that power tool. So I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, I actually think the raw power is pretty similar between the two of them. The difference is Kjerstad knows how to get to it. He's a barrel machine. He knows how to barrel up the ball in game, raw power to in game power. He knows how to get to it, and often we know Cowser has it in him. We've seen him hit bombs. We've seen him hit opposite field shots, and his problem, and we saw it at the major league level, and I'm sure this is what he's going to be working on, is I heard analysis of this, like, sorry, I can't remember exactly where, but he's almost like too passive. He has that Gunnar Henderson syndrome from April of 2023, where it's like he knows what's a ball, he knows what's a strike, he knows what he can drive, but he's almost too selective, where then he'll get to 2 strikes and it's a little bit harder to. He's got to be more aggressive in the zone. And I think if he does that, he could reach that power. But yeah, Kjerstad, that bat is going to play, whether he can learn to be better in right field, if he can learn to be better at first base, or he's just a DH. The bat's going to play. He's going to have a really solid major league career just with that alone. Cowser, I would keep over him just because he can play all 3 outfield positions. He's got a great arm. He's got that power that he could maybe tap into, probably not as regularly as Kjerstad, even in the most optimistic take, but he's got more outs as far as being able to help a team in the long run, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the more fun debates, I think, when you're talking about the prospects. And you've got Team Colton Cowser, you've got Team Heston Kjerstad. Like, that's not saying that one is a bad prospect and the other one's the good prospect. It's kind of just falls down to your preference. And for me, I think they both could be very successful in major leaguers. Kjerstad could very well be a guy who bats, 4 or 5 in your lineup and hits 30 bombs a year. And Cowser could potentially be a good leadoff hitter or number 2 hitter in an MLB lineup. They both still have to prove it in the big leagues. They still have holes in their games. There's going to be strikeouts with both of these guys, but yeah, I just think, look at the grades. I mean, hit tool, Cowser 55, Kjerstad 50. You talk about the power. Kjerstad's got 60 grade power. Cowser's got 55 grade. I mean, you're talking about a mile separation there. The run, Cowser's got Kjerstad by a good bit there, although we watched Kjerstad leg out some inside the Parkers last year. The fielding, Cowser's got the center field defense. I think I think Kjerstad's defense, we might have mentioned this when we did that crowded outfield episode. I think Kjerstad's defense, it gets the Santander treatment. Say that, repeat that it's better than what most people give him credit for. I think he can be a very solid corner outfielder who hits 20 to 30 home runs a year and is a productive major leaguer. But like, if you're asking me, one of them has to go in a deal. Yeah, I'm kind of leaning towards Kjerstad because Kowser's got the center field defense makeup. The power is almost just as good as Kjerstad. You just got to tap into it now. He's speed. He can steal bases as well. The hit tool, the eye is phenomenal. Arguably the best eye in the entire organization. I mean, it's really comes down to your preference between these two guys, I think. And I don't really think there is a right or wrong answer at this point.
No, and I would add too that if you don't see a trade, there's a path for both of these guys to have at least the start of their major league careers, be in Baltimore, and for them to have success here, because they're really not duplicates. They're two completely different types of players who would fill different roles on the team, and both of them could help you win games at their best. And I'm going to transition now to Mayo and Basallo, and we're going to talk about them as well when we get into MLB Pipeline's prospect rankings by position. But to see these guys both inside the top 20 of a prospect list at their young ages, in Mayo's case, knocking on the door of the major leagues now, Basallo having that meteoric rise that he had last year, maybe not being too far from the majors at this point, despite only being 19 years old. What are your thoughts on those two guys?
I think they're both underrated still. Basallo not as much, but especially Mayo. It's like Orioles, we're spoiled. We are so spoiled. We had Adley, we had Gunnar, we have Jackson, and it's like everyone's excited for Jackson, understandably so, like I was just talking about earlier. But Coby Mayo, according to Baseball Prospectus, and even according to Baseball America, he's a top 25, top 15 prospect in baseball who is seasoned at AAA, 22 years old, ready to contribute at the major league level. Like, that's if we didn't have this recent run, it'd be like, oh my God, Coby Mayo, this is the best prospect since Manny Machado. We've been spoiled, so we kind of lose sight of that. And there's two prospects better than him, according to these outlets. So yeah, it's crazy to think that he's our third best prospect when he would probably be the best prospect for 2/3 of baseball. Yeah, and I'm just so curious to see how he looks in spring training, in the outfield, at the plate, with the actual extended run of spring training games. Like, there's going to be some interesting decisions to be made, and maybe they will make themselves just because of lack of room. But I think some of these kids could force the issue where it's like, it's hard to ignore what they're doing in spring training and then early on in AAA. Yeah, it's going to be hard to keep guys like Mayo down for long if they do.
Yeah, the Basallo love is amazing to see. And I think really at this point, it's just kind of, and maybe we can touch on this when we look at MLB Pipeline stuff, but it's like, who is the better catching prospect, Ethan Salas or Sammy Basallo, right? But with my thing with Mayo, and I'm just going to quote from Neoli's right up here again, because I think this highlights perfectly the adjustments that Mayo made last year at the AAA level, mind you. The walk rate went from 9.1% to 15.1%. This guy was 70 grade power who hits nuclear bombs, walking at a 15% rate at the AAA level. He cut his chase rate from 27% down to 23%. The hard hit rate went from 31% to 46%. And what did we see a lot last year? I remember somebody reaching out to me like, has Coby Mayo responded to one of the Mayo home run videos, of course, that he's posted like on a nightly basis. But someone was like, has Mayo ever hit an opposite field home run in his career? I'm like, actually, I don't know if he has up to this point. And then he gets to Norfolk and he hits like 4, 2 of them in the exact same spot over there at Harvard Park. I mean, the guy just oppo bomb, dead center bomb. You started seeing a lot more of that by the end of the year in Norfolk. I don't think Basallo's final numbers, you look at some of his stats, are just mind-numbing. They're hard to really comprehend what he did at his age and at that level, and the fact that he is a catcher, a massive human being behind the plate. With Mayo, those adjustments, I think, speak volumes about what we can expect to see this coming season. I keep wanting to say next year. I'm like,
I know, right?
next season is like 3 weeks away.
Yeah, I know. And the thing with Mayo, like, yeah, that walk rate, like he is improving just like Holliday. These guys, when they're so young, they can improve so fast and so much. Like it's kind of scary. His defense got better. I think he's I think he is absolutely enough of an athlete to at least be Anthony Santander out there in right field, right? I don't see why not, with obviously a much better arm, probably a better arm than Austin Hayes, and everyone loves his arm. So, yeah. And then Basallo, the more I look at his numbers and just put it in, it was the tweet from, I think it was Orioles Review, where it was like comparing Basallo's numbers at 18 to Julio Rodriguez, Ronald Acuna, Wander Franco, a bunch of these, Juan Soto, these amazing international superstars who killed the ball in the minor leagues at such a young age. Basallo had better numbers than like all of them, and he's a catcher, and he made it to AA. Obviously, it was only a week long, but I mean, he was at high A for a decent amount of time and did much better there than he did in low A. He's the one guy that like made Aberdeen seem like it was at short season ball again and not in high A. But yeah, Basallo, again, just a freak in nature, the athlete that he is. And again, he's going to be 19 almost all year round. How much has he improved in this offseason? It's crazy to think about that. Even if the Orioles make no trades, they keep all the prospects, hoard them all. We could be the first team that all homegrown like line up and just own baseball for the next half decade or more.
We'll go over now to MLB Pipeline's prospect rankings by position. I should add that we're recording this on Wednesday night. MLB Pipeline's top 100 overall list is still a couple nights away from dropping, and we don't have their outfield rankings published yet, but we have most of the positions in, including catcher, where Samuel Basallo ranks second in the game behind only Ethan Salas of the Padres. Connor Norby ranks seventh among all second base prospects, while Jackson Holliday tops the list of shortstops, and Kobe Mayo comes in fourth, behind only Junior Caminero of the Rays, Noelvi Marte of the Reds, and Colt Keith of the Tigers. Let's just dive right in with the Basallo-Salas discussion. Salas is the correct call, in my opinion. I think that what he's doing at an even younger age than Basallo bodes really well for his future. But I wanted to note this, which is that right now, MLB Pipeline has Basallo's field grade at 45, which is a substantial gap from where they grade Salas, which is a 65. And I'll read what Pipeline wrote about Basallo's defense. He's, quote, "He's made strides there too, and his plus arm helped him throw out 33.1% of potential base stealers a year ago. There's still work to be done on his overall receiving, but his bat will profile just fine at first base, where he's been getting comfortable defensively to provide with some positional flexibility, especially with Adley Rutschman behind the dish in Baltimore." I think that it's fair when you look at Basallo right now, especially given how big he is, whether he's going to stick behind the plate. But how much more development do the two of you think we could see with his defense?
I mean, substantial amount. It's hard. I know, speaking for myself, it's extremely hard to sit here and kind of break down the catchers. I mean, just a hitter pitcher alone is not a scout. So not going to pretend to be, but with the defensive stuff, that's a lot harder to kind of get at. I remember a lot of games last year and a lot of moments where Basallo stole a good number of third strikes, and you could tell when he stole the strike because he got a little bit more animated behind the plate in those games that I'm watching. He's fine. Like that write-up mentioned, you don't need him to be an everyday catcher with Adley there. You just need him to be able to catch 2 or 3 days a week, if that. But with the debate there between Salas and Basallo, like, I mean, Salas is 2 years younger. He's only 17, and he got $5.6 million. Basallo got just over $1 million. So when you look at an outlet like Pipeline, that's going to play heavily. The 2-year age difference and that signing bonus gap, that's the difference there. Would I prefer to have Basallo? I'm sure I'm saying this with orange-colored glasses because we've watching him on a nightly basis do what he did, but I would say yes, because the kid can mash. And Salas's offensive numbers really haven't shown up nearly as well as Basallo's had up to this point. But yeah, Salas, I mean, his scouting report, the defense gets rave reviews, and so I think that's really the only difference there between those two when you're looking at a list like this. It's the signing bonus and the age, but Basallo's numbers are out of this world better.
I want to start off and say Ethan Salas is a fantastic prospect. So no disrespect to him about to come here, but I do think if you're talking strictly catcher ability, he's a better catcher prospect than Samuel Basallo. But I think Basallo is a better overall prospect than Salas, just because he doesn't have to rely on his glove, which, like Nick said, he'll be fine. He can throw runners out. All he has to be is James McCann behind the plate, which doesn't seem too hard. And even if he, Baseball Prospectus future projection podcast, Ben Badler said, even if he's not a catcher at all, he's still a top 10 prospect in baseball with his bat alone. And we've seen him. He's a much better athlete, smoother out there than I would have expected given his size, even at first base. So I don't think he's going to hurt you with the glove. And the bat is just so much better. Salas will be a good hitter, no doubt about it. And he made it to Double-A, but he played like a week in High A, or he barely played in High A and had terrible numbers. And then he promoted him to Double-A, where he continued to have terrible numbers. He did good against Low A, which we know is, not exactly the toughest test. So I personally had Basallo 10 in my overall top 100 rankings and Salas 14th. So I'm a Basallo guy, obviously, but yeah, that's what I think.
I'm going to talk about Connor Norby for a minute. He does not rank on either the top 100 lists. We talked about that with Baseball America or Baseball Prospectus. He comes in 7 on this list, which tells me that MLB Pipeline still likes him, but that he's probably not going to make their top 100. We've spent a lot of the offseason talking about where Norby does or doesn't fit into the system, what the future holds for him. I will say this, though, which is that I think if you break his season down, 2023 compared to 2022, I thought that this past season was actually the better year overall. And I know that there may be some, it might be held against him a little bit that he didn't get to the major leagues and that he had much more time in AAA than a similar prospect in another organization would have had. But I still look at Norby as at least back-end top 100 material.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that Norby's 2023 was better than his 2022 season, and it did start out kind of rocky, but especially like the strikeouts, the swing and miss stuff. But by the end of the year, the guy was hitting the ball much better, making a ton more contact, specifically just drilling home runs. He could take earlier in the year. I mean, you throw him a fastball up in the zone, he's probably striking out. But by the end of the year, he's sending that pitch the other way over the fence, because that was a fun little battle, I know, between him and Mayo, who's going to hit the most opposite field home runs. Norby can do it. He's a bat first, second base guy who maybe the defense is average. Maybe it's slightly below average. Maybe he can work out in the outfield. Maybe he doesn't. But I think you still see a lot of guys with Norby's profile have successful careers in the big leagues. Obviously, the big question here is that going to be in Baltimore? It's going to be tough for him, obviously. But just looking at him, forget about who else is on the roster, who else is in the organization. Just looking at Norby as a prospect, maybe he does get overlooked just a little bit because of all that depth and he's hidden down here in this organization. But the guy's got power. The guy can steal bases. He can play a solid second base. He's not going to hurt you. He's not Jemai Jones out there. I'm just going to bring his name up whenever we can. He's not going to butcher the ball at second base. He may not get to everything, but he's not going to butcher it. So I think he's going to be a solid player somewhere. We'll see where that ends up being, but he's definitely top 100 material.
I agree. It feels like he's been around longer than he actually has because he sprinted to AAA in 2022. Him and Colton Cowser both, but he just boom, got to AAA and then really performed well there at the end of the 2022. But 2023, I mean, it still was only his second full season in professional baseball, and he got to spend the entire season in AAA, which I'm sure to him was not a positive, but I think overall, as far as development goes, I think it's definitely a positive because, you got to see him adjust and he got better as the year went on, which is what you want to see. And yeah, he could probably play a decent left field. He can play decent second base, but I think if he's on the Detroit Tigers, if he's on the Seattle Mariners, those fans will be, as soon as they see him play, they're going to be thrilled to have him. And I think, I feel like almost his meteoric rise in 2022 almost hurt him as far as 2023 went with the expectation game. And I think he's just super, super solid back of the top 100 prospect. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting, though, just because, like I was talking about with Ortiz, do the Orioles want to keep him around because even if the bat doesn't develop, he's an elite defender who's going to provide value to your organization? With Norby, it's like the Orioles also don't have to necessarily be super eager to trade him because he could, if the Orioles decide they want to, I know we've talked about this before, it's messed up. I hate it. I feel terrible for the guy. But if the Orioles want to, they could keep him in Norfolk all year long once again. So I don't know. It's kind of why I get this sense of if there is a trade, I want them to trade Norby just because he deserves to start every day in the major league level. And it's just not going to happen here in Baltimore, I don't think.
And we'll talk a little bit more about a possible move the Orioles might or might not make in our next episode, which is going to dive into the Orioles starting pitching depth as spring training approaches. In the meantime, you can check us out on our many social media channels. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, YouTube, TikTok. We also have a Substack, which you can subscribe to now. I will have a piece coming up here soon about Orioles who might be on top 100 lists in the near future, but aren't now. So you're going to want to check that out. Orioles on the Verge is part of the Believe Podcast Network. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge. And if you're watching live, stay with us because we are about to deliver that second episode. Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's episode, we're going to get into the Orioles pitching depth as they head into the 2024 season with a special focus on the starting rotation. Among the topics we're going to cover are Grayson Rodriguez and Kyle Bradish and the roles that they're going to play on the 2024 team. The remaining pitchers who are with the Orioles and why the Orioles might or might not make a move before the 2024 season begins. We're going to start first, though, with the 2023 season. Orioles win 101 games, capture the American League East. And without a doubt, the two big reasons for that were Kyle Bradish and Grayson Rodriguez. Bradish took a massive step forward from a solid but often inconsistent rookie season in 2022 to really become the Orioles' best starter in 2023, posting a 2.83 ERA across 168 and 2/3 innings pitched, striking out 168 batters while walking 44 and earning some love in Cy Young voting as he ranked 4th in the American League. Rodriguez, meanwhile, overcame a very challenging start and a demotion to Norfolk to reemerge as one of the Orioles' more electric and sometimes best starters over the summer and had some big wins for the Orioles in the second half of the season. Did struggle in the playoffs, but nonetheless ended his rookie season, regular season at least, on a high note. And what prompted us to take a look at this topic tonight was a really informative piece in the Baltimore Banner recently by friend of the show, Andy Koska. Andy got a chance to talk to Grayson Rodriguez a little bit about what his approach is going to be in 2024 and how he's been gearing up for next season. And one of the things that was clear from this article is expect more fastballs of the 4-seam and the 2-seam variety from him. And Andy breaks down some of the starts last year where Rodriguez was successful while relying heavily on the fastball. And we'll get into that a little bit here in a minute. But Nick, I'll start with you and we'll focus on Rodriguez. There were some ups and downs, but I think overall we feel good about how he ended last season. What adjustments do you think he can make to be even better in 2024?
First of all, I wanted to picture Grayson Rodriguez, like in Andy's article, great piece. I just picture him sitting like at home in his, I don't know if he's got like a home movie theater. I don't know if he's got some dark room that's just his. I don't know, but just watching his starts. And Andy talked about how he goes pitch by pitch and he'll watch the broadcast and then kind of second guess, like, okay, what am I going to throw now with this newfound knowledge? What am I going to throw against this guy? And kind of breaking down these starts that way. I just picture him like watching these starts, like with a cigar, sitting back, just laughing. Like these guys have no idea what's coming next year with this stuff. I'm jacked after reading that article. You rattled off some of the numbers there. The 2.58 ERA in the second half of the year, 0.35 home run per 9 rate, which that was what, like 2.5 or 3 in his first stint in the major leagues. The K rate did drop, but the walk rate dropped significantly as well. And just the last 3 starts, 18 and 2/3 innings, struck out 19, walked just 3 guys, and gave up just 3 earned runs. And that included that 8 innings of shutout ball with no walks against the Rays. Amazing. Projections actually like Grayson over Bradish this year, which I think is entirely fair. Like we saw Bradish struggle. He hit the IL. Maybe it was the phantom IL. I don't know. But whatever it was, it worked because he came back, dominated his second stint. That was last year, 2 years ago. Comes out in year 2 and he just shoved. Grayson struggled but flashed, was sent down, fixed things, came back up and shoved over. We're talking about a pretty decently sized sample in that second half of the year when he pitched. If he takes that same sort of leap this season, like he's going to emerge as the top dog in this rotation, pending a trade, of course. But we're just looking at the guys who are on this roster now. He's going to emerge as the top dog in this rotation and blossom into that number 1 guy who I think of prospects. He was the top pitching prospect in baseball for a couple of years there. We're starting to see that Grayson emerge at the major league level. And the ceiling is just, I can't see it. It's so high with Grayson, to be honest.
Yeah, more fastballs. It sounds great because he's got a great one. He's got a great fastball, a lot of hop. I think it really comes down to the fastball command. And I think if he can command it better, and especially if he's going to throw a sinker into the mix, a 2-seamer, that can really keep hitters off balance. And his already great changeup could play up even more if they're thinking, man, it's going to be a fastball, up, change up, pull the string on him, see you later. I really think the rest will come into place if he focuses on that fastball and spotting it where he wants to. We know he's got great other pitches as well, but I think that's a really good decision. And I think, yeah, man, I can't believe baseball's 3 weeks away. I'm getting finally like starting to believe it now that we've said it a bunch tonight. And yeah, I really want to see how Bradish and Rodriguez lead this rotation. I think they're both under contract with the Orioles for Bradish for 5 more seasons, Rodriguez for 6. It's gonna be a nice little run at the top of that rotation here.
Let's talk about Bradish for a minute. What are your expectations for him going into next year? Because we were pretty high on Bradish when he was in the minor leagues, and we had people in the Orioles organization who, Matt Blood among them, who would talk up Bradish any chance that they got as a starter. And despite some of the doubts that kind of lingered even through his first year in the major leagues, he is showing that he can stick in a major league rotation. What do you think the next step forward looks like for him?
Well, yeah, it's so true that Matt Blood. It was like, it's not Grayson Rodriguez, DL Hall. Oh yeah, and Matt Bradish or Kyle Bradish. It's Grayson Rodriguez, DL Hall, and Kyle Bradish. Like he put them in the same league, the same sentence, and that turned out to be very fortuitous. Um, and yeah, Bradish might have got a lot of love for the AL Cy Young last year, 4th place, but he's certainly not getting a lot of love as far as predicting him to be a potential Cy Young winner in 2024, because he's not in the top 10 of any of these lists I've seen with odds and predictions and stuff, which is such a slap in the face for a guy who I think had the second best stuff plus numbers in the second half period. And you could just see like his game planning is better. The stuff is crisper. It's just, he knows what he's doing now. He always had the stuff, but now he knows what to throw and when, and how to set people up and put them down. And I think that's only going to improve as he continues to be in the prime of his pitching career. So yeah, it's going to be fun to see who's better between Bradish and Rodriguez in 2024. My money's on Bradish just because he's got that extra experience and time, and he's proven to himself and to everyone else that he's done it. He can do it again. But yeah, Kyle Bradish, he's the ace that the Orioles don't need to trade for, and we'll see if they actually will try to trade for a secondary one as well.
Yeah, as high as I am on Bradish, I do wonder like how much more of a ceiling is there with him? Like genuinely, I'd be curious, like someone who can, break him down a little bit more, right? Is how much more can we get out of his stuff? I think he kind of, if you look at some of the expected stats, it kind of suggests he may have overperformed a little bit last year. And I think maybe that's why, if you look at some of the projections, they're kind of a little bit lower on him. I think they're kind of baking him towards like regressing a little bit next year. I don't see him regressing to like a 2-WAR pitcher or something next year. I still think he's going to be a very dominant starter. I'm just genuinely curious about how much more of a ceiling we see out of him next year. But I mean, he's coming into this year. I didn't realize, just kind of comparing him to some other guys, I didn't realize just how good some of his numbers were. The 2.83 ERA, obviously fantastic, near 50% ground ball rate, strikeout rate, 3.8 WAR. That 3.8 WAR ranked 16th in all of baseball, which was ahead of Jesus Luzardo, Dylan Cease, Corbin Burns, Luis Castillo, Kodai Senga. Like, a lot of those guys are people the Orioles fans have been clamoring the Orioles to trade for this year. Bradish was higher WAR, worth more than all those guys last year. I'm not saying in any way that means we should not trade for those guys. Trade for Jesus Luzardo right now. Let's do part 3 podcast tonight. I'm down. But just to highlight, like, Bradish was really, really good. And he is up in that upper tier of pitchers in baseball. And this guy was tagged as a relief prospect like 3 years ago. Orioles pitching development coming through clutch with Bradish, and hopefully we see that same rise with Grayson Rodriguez this year.
One thing that I think is going to be really important for the Orioles is to get innings out of their starters. And I look at Bradish in particular, 168 and 2/3 innings last year, over 30 starts. I think it's reasonable that in year 3, you're going to look for that number to climb. Now, if you look at his Baseball Savant page, the expected ERA for Bradish last season is 3.77. That doesn't get him a 4th place vote or a 4th place finish in Cy Young voting, but that's still a good year. If you got, let's say, a mid-3s ERA, but he did it over 185 innings or over 190 innings as compared to 168, would you consider that some level of success?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ERA, there's only so much you control in that. Like, as long as he's giving us those quality innings, like you said, like if he's giving you Jordan Lyles, Kyle Gibson style innings with obviously a full run and a half better ERA, I will take that every day of the week. And that's the one thing I guess you can say the Orioles are missing, is that workhorse ace. I think Kyle Bradish established himself as a 1/2 starter in the big leagues last year, but can he be the guy that's Garrett Cole? No one really pitches 200 innings anymore, I feel like, this day and age, but approaching 200 innings while still, ERA in the threes, just like you're going out there, you're reliable. You know you're going to get 6 to 7 innings of a game where you're going to be in it no matter what. Like that's what the Orioles need, and I think Bradish could be that guy. I think Rodriguez could certainly be that guy. But yeah, I would be happy to answer your question.
Yeah, I think we can talk about the rest of the rotation here momentarily, where there's a lot more question marks. But just looking at the top two right now as it stands, you're looking at the innings. Grayson had 163 innings between AAA and the MLB level. Bradish had 168. If both these guys can get that 180 to 190 plus range this season, that's going to make a huge difference, I think. And you've got the playoff experience as well. Grayson touched on that in Andy's article, like getting that pressure, understanding that energy that was at Camden Yards, and that was something that I kind of assumed with these younger guys, they could succumb to that kind of pressure because yes, you're playing at home, but it's a different type of energy when you're talking about a sold out stadium in the playoffs. These guys expect that now. They know exactly what that's going to feel like, and if they're set up really nice to go 180 plus innings this year, get that same level of production. We see Grayson. We see more second half Grayson next year. You got the top two at least, if that stays the same over the course of the year, which hopefully it doesn't. But if it is just those two guys, you're looking at one of the best duos, I think, in Major League Baseball. One that's definitely like top 10 duos in baseball.
If you look at the pitchers that are on the Orioles roster now, there's two more that I think you're pretty safe to pencil into starting rotation spots, health permitting. And that's Dean Kramer, who among pitchers returning from 2023 through the most innings last year. Kyle Gibson led the team with 192 innings pitched, but Kramer was behind him at 172 and 2/3. And then you have Means, who now will be a year removed from Tommy John surgery. He got some major league time in last year, 23 and 2/3 innings pitched before the season ended, and was generally effective, even if it didn't look like his stuff was all the way back at times. So if Means is healthy and Kramer continues to do what Kramer does, which is, some starts will be a little bit frustrating, but then he also seems to have a knack for pulling out a big start when you need it. How much would that help the Orioles?
That's huge, because honestly, when looking at this rotation as a whole, all the confidence in the world in 1 and 2. And then after that, like, I don't feel confident in this rotation. Honestly, that confidence level is extremely low, just because like Means pitched 155 innings in 2019. And then since then, it's been 43 innings, 146 innings, 8 innings, 23 innings. He had the hiccup when coming back from Tommy John surgery last year. I think 2 hiccups coming back in his return from Tommy John surgery. A guy who already has an injury history. I love the guy, but I just don't have much faith in him being a productive number 3 on a team that should be a World Series contender this season. And then with Kramer, I think he's fine if he's like number 5 in your rotation for this year. And we've talked about before, you mentioned the highs. He's got his highs, he's got his lows, but they kind of even out over the course of the season. If he can be a 1.5 WAR pitcher who throws 198 innings a year, that's great. That's a solid number 5 guy. I feel like the Dean Kramer gang is a pretty strong and loyal following. I just don't have those passionate feelings about Dean. I think he's a fine regular season pitcher to put in at number 5. But like the rest of this rotation is just 3 through 5 as a whole it scares me, to be completely honest.
Yeah, and it's why I feel like it's just such a no-brainer to get a guy to put in between Bradish and Rodriguez and Means and Kramer. I think Means and Kramer look so much better at 4 and 5 rather than 3 and 4. I think Kramer can be like the Kyle Gibson, Jordan Lyles in-house, like himself. I think he could be the innings eater type of guy at the bottom of a rotation for this team if they go ahead and get someone like a Luzardo, a Cease, whoever it is, Brian Wu, Bryce Miller. Means, yeah, he looked really good, especially that Guardians game. He almost threw another no-hitter. Obviously, it's a little scary that his his elbow barked at him again at the end of the season, couldn't get him in the playoffs. But I do think that could just be like, I don't know. I'm going to be optimistic and say that was just kind of like it happens and he'll be fine in spring training. But you can't count on him to give you 150 plus innings. You just can't. So you have Cole Irvin, obviously, as we'll get to, which I think he's a little underrated at this point, Mr. Cole Irvin. But yeah, I agree. We need someone in the middle, and hopefully that happens before the season starts.
Yeah, I think the best case scenario for Kramer right now is that he develops into the kind of pitcher that keeps you from having to go out and sign the Jordan Lyles or the Kyle Gibson of that year's free agent class, because he can be the consistent 185, 190 innings arm that's down towards the bottom of your rotation, who nothing he does is really flashy. And he's going to have some real clunkers, but for the most part, he's going to keep you in games. And then with Means, I agree with both of you. It would be great to see him bounce back, but I'm not counting on him going out there and picking up and being the John Means of 2019, because I think it's going to realistically be maybe 145, 150 innings. If you get that, I think you consider that a success. And of course, you've got a lot to think about in terms of how you're going to make up those innings and whether you're going to do it internally, externally, or maybe a little bit of both. And you got to put a lot of thought into it.
You know what would help you make that decision when you're thinking about how you're going to replace those innings? Magic Mind. Of course. I don't know about you guys, but I've been worried about not having enough energy to stay on top of work and family responsibilities, keeping up with 2 toddlers running around the house, and then dedicating enough time to producing the amount of content that we do, as we're running on hour number 2 here tonight. But I have stayed on my Magic Mind routine, which is helping these small, all natural energy shots. Super easy to use. They taste great. They've helped me cut out the afternoon coffee, and now our content schedule has ramped back up again. I haven't been worried about finding enough energy for late night recordings and writings. Magic Mind makes me more productive and more focused. I get more done in less time thanks to the nootropics inside that improve attention, concentration, and cognition, all without the jittery side effects. With all natural ingredients like matcha and lion's mane mushrooms, I would really encourage everyone listening to try it out as well if you're having trouble being at a 100% some days. It's been a game changer for me, and I think it can be for everyone listening as well. Only during the month of January, Magic Mind is helping you crush your 2024 New Year's resolutions fully focused. Everyone listening can get 1 month free when you're subscribing for 3 months at magicmind.com/JANOTV and use our exclusive code OTV20. It's an extra 20% off, which gets you up to 75% off. This only lasts until the end of January, so hurry up before it goes away. magicmind.com/JANOTV and use our code OTV20 for additional savings.
We'll go now to how the Orioles are going to fill that 5th and final spot in the rotation, because it has been really the hot button issue of this offseason. The hope, anticipation that the Orioles are going to trade for a frontline starter so far has not come to fruition. Meanwhile, you have a lot of solid arms coming back, but they're all guys with major question marks going into 2024, and a free agent market with pitching that is really thin when you get past the top 2 guys left on the board in Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery, neither of whom seem like likely targets for the Orioles. So we're going to take this part of the episode to really dive into that. And the first thought that comes to mind is the trade possibilities. Dylan Cease has been a name that has been widely connected to the Orioles throughout this offseason. He hasn't moved yet. The sense seems to be that the White Sox have a very high asking price for him, and they may be content to ride into the season with Cease, have him pitch on their bad team for the first half of the year, and see if they can get their asking price at the trade deadline. One thing I will caution, though, and I'm going to turn this over to you guys after this to get your thoughts on this. This offseason has moved at a glacial pace, and you're going to have a week or two where there is basically a month's worth of activity sometime here in the next 3 weeks. It's going to happen. And at that point, if the White Sox are serious about trading Dylan Cease, they're going to trade him. If they don't really care to move him, they'll ride that out and they'll go into the season. But I wouldn't look at the fact that he hasn't been moved yet and draw the conclusion, okay, he's not being traded. Asking price is too high. This offseason, despite the fact that we're now months into it, feels like it's barely started.
So true. It's agonizing. Yeah, I would put money on the White Sox are going to trade Dylan Cease before the season starts. I don't care what anyone says. Oh, I think the White Sox are taking their ball and going home and they're being unreasonable. Yeah, of course they are, because they have no reason not to be right now. I think it's a little bit stupid. I think they probably should have just traded him by now. They've apparently received some pretty good offers, some pretty fair offers, and I don't think they can just like will Dylan Cease into being an ace who deserves like some monumental package. I mean, this is a guy that had one amazing year and he's had a couple other decent years. Last year was iffy. I think he got a little bit unlucky as far as like the peripherals, and he pitched better than I think the overall numbers say, but I just don't think they can trade him as an ace when he's more of a middle of the rotation guy, I think. And they'd be stupid not to trade him before the season starts. I just think it's way too much risk. What if he is mediocre again in the first half? What if he gets hurt? They're in the middle of a rebuild. There's no reason for them not to trade him. So I do think he will be traded. The Orioles it seems like it's inevitable. It seems like it's the perfect fit. I would personally rather go out and even if it's spending more on Jesus Luzardo, that's what I would do. Or I'd love to get one of those Mariners guys, as we've said a lot this offseason. But yeah, I do think Dylan Cease will probably be an Oriole by the time the season gets here, but you can't count on it because it is the White Sox. And if they are going to keep those demands and do something stupid like go into the season with him in the rotation when they're expected to be like the worst team in the league, then that's on them. But I think ultimately, like we have said on this podcast, the Orioles can beat any offer. It doesn't like they might not love our best offer right now, but I think when they get all the pitchers are off the market and everyone's got their best offer out for Dylan Cease, I think the Orioles are going to have that best offer and they're going to take it.
Yeah, if you're looking at like external options, I mean, who's left on the free agent market? It's definitely not anything super enticing. I don't want to pay the money that Jordan Montgomery is going to command. There's that debate on, do you go after the top guy or do you try to fill in the back of the rotation, stabilize the back of the rotation more with like a Hyun-Jin Ryu or one of these guys like that? I'd probably prefer let's just make the move and get the top of the rotation arm instead. Let's show that we're entering a new phase here in Baltimore. Honestly, the Cease stuff is fun. I've been buying Cease in best ball drafts, hoping that he does get traded to Baltimore and the strikeouts go up and he becomes the workhorse who's 200 plus innings for the Orioles. But I don't know. I'm kind of moving on to the Miami side of things, to be honest, as well, just because for whatever reason, the Marlins every single year, like I don't put together a ranking of college hitters, or college players come draft time, but I have a list probably 100, 150 deep of like just my guys that I watched, that I studied, that I'm familiar with. And I swear it seems like every year the Marlins will just pick off the top guy that's left on my list every year. And I love their draft classes. Now, I'm not saying they're taking the best guys, but they're taking guys that I just fall in love with during the college season. And you look at this rotation and some of the pitching depth they have on the farm, it's good. It's Jesus Luzardo. It's Yuri Perez. And I know they're probably not going to trade him, or Braxton Garrett. I've been buying a ton of Braxton Garrett, by the way. But, Edward Cabrera, it's no Max Meyer. Like, they've got a ton of quality pitching here. They've got no bats. Like, Jazz Chisholm can't stay healthy. Jazz Chisholm should be marketed more across baseball. I'll be the first one to say that. Not the only one to say that, but I will say that loud and proud. But he just can't stay healthy. Like, you're relying on like Brian De La Cruz and John Birdie to be the majority of your offense, or a big chunk of your offense. You need help. And you look at their prospect list. I was looking at today. Yeah, it's Noble Meyer, Thomas White, Max Meyer at the top. That's solid. But your top hitting prospect is Jacob Berry, Victor Mesa Jr., Kemp Alderman, and Brock Vandenberg are in your top 10. You need hitters. It all just makes so much sense. Like the Orioles are loaded with hitters. The Marlins need hitters. The Marlins have a lot of really fun pitchers. The Orioles need fun pitchers and good pitchers, preferably. But like it just makes so much sense. I'd rather just let's splurge and go after some of these Marlins guys. The Seattle stuff makes a ton of sense too. Like, why, if you're Seattle, if you're Jerry Dipoto, why don't you just sign the homegrown guy in Blake Snell? You have an abundance of quality, high quality pitchers on that roster. Trade one of them. You need offensive help as well. Everything just lines up so perfectly for the Orioles, but like it does take two to tango. The Orioles have their evaluations of other teams' prospects, and they have obviously their own evaluations of their own prospects. The Mariners, the Marlins, the White Sox, they all have their evaluations of Orioles prospects. It's a matter of it matching up, and that's a very difficult thing to do. But that's what makes it extra frustrating is there are all these scenarios that are just perfect for a trade opportunity, and it's not happening yet. But like Zach said, we're going to see an entire offseason happen in like 1 week, a 1 week span. Anything can still happen. But yeah, it is. I feel the frustrations for the same frustrations a lot of Orioles fans of like something should happen because I don't feel confident again in this rotation as we enter the year.
You know, when I look at the trade market broadly, I do think that there are options out there other than Cease, and the Mariners and the Marlins are the first two organizations I'm going to look at. And from the Marlins' perspective in particular, the Orioles are an attractive trade partner because they have so many bats that are either on the cusp of being major league ready or are major league ready and just can't fit into this lineup right now. And the Marlins' track record lately with hitters is terrible out of their farm system. I think they draft well. I agree with you, Nick. I like generally coming out of their drafts, like what they have, but they just have not been able to turn that into a homegrown player who has sustained success for them at the major league level. So why not get a guy who's been developing in another system, bring him in and hope it works, especially because I think that Luzardo is a little bit different. I think that if you trade Luzardo, you are taking a big step back for next year. But they could trade Edward Cabrera, who isn't a perfect fit for the Orioles, but it's a trade I would understand if they went out to get him. You could trade Cabrera, get a couple of hitters back, and still be competitive next year. The Mariners are in a very similar position with pitchers like Miller and Wu. They could trade either one of those guys and still be competitive. And that's, in my opinion, with or without Blake Snell. So those two teams have some flexibility. And if the Orioles want to move on from the White Sox, and I don't think for a second they've only been focused on Cease, but if they know it's not going to work with the White Sox, those are two organizations that I would turn to immediately. And I will say this with the White Sox. One thing I try to think about this from their perspective recently. I have to wonder how much of Chris Getz is nervous that if he doesn't get the Cease trade right, the rebuild's going to get off to a bad start, because you look at that major league roster, and assuming they're not moving Luis Robert anytime soon, there is nothing else there that's going to attract another team to give you a boatload of prospects. Nothing.
You can't will tradable players into existence. You just got to hope they kind of show up. When you sign the guy for a 1-year deal, try to rebound and trade him at the deadline. I don't know what to tell him, but like I was saying, like you just can't say this is all we got. So you're going to have to give us 4 top 100 prospects. No, it's just not going to work that way. Joey Ortiz, it's like made to be a Marlin. I just could see it, like him in that jersey, in that environment. Like, God, I would love to see that. Heston Kjerstad would do wonders for that offense. Like Heston Kjerstad, Joey Ortiz, I don't know, Judd Fabian, and maybe one more person if they want for Jesus Luzardo. Let's go. Come on. Or even do a double package where Edward Cabrera could be another high leverage bullpen arm. I think he would be incredible to move to the bullpen. and then could also be a guy that, like DL Hall, could start eventually too. So yeah, there's just so, and who knows, maybe there's a guy like Mitch Keller or some random guy who's available and we don't even know it, and the Orioles will get him. So it's like you said, it's probably going to be February 10th, and off season started. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, and I know it's different because in this instance, the White Sox traded a prospect for a proven major league starter. So this would be a little reverse of that. But if you're Getz, you're the new guy. You don't want to be the guy who makes this version of the Fernando Tatis Jr. trade, right? Like for trading away Fernando Tatis Jr. for James Shields. I don't know. But I am looking at a tweet here right now that says, once again, Domingo Germán's name is coming up, and that's the former Yankee is in talks with 6 teams, including the AL East Blue Jays and Orioles, and he has offers on the table apparently. So
please,
this episode's
Blue
already
Jays, and please let this be. Hey, we will sign this guy if you don't accept our offer.
I think that's a good point now to get to the free agent market, which is pretty thin at this point. And really, when I look beyond that Snell and Montgomery tier, I really think that if you're signing one of these pitchers, you're buying time. You're hoping that Ryu or Michael Lorenzen can come in and give you a good first half so that there's someone there to kind of prop up the rotation before you make the move at the deadline, which you're still going to have to do. And maybe it just would boil down to the Orioles comparing Lorenzen to some of their in-house options like Tyler Wells and Cole Irvin, or looking at Ryu in comparison to Irvin and Bruce Zimmerman as left-handers, and feeling more confident in one of those guys being able to get them through the first few months. That's not the best way to approach your starting rotation by a long shot, but I think that short of a trade, that's the path the Orioles are going to have to take unless they want to go entirely with this group that they have now.
Yeah. I mean, there are some guys here on this list that since we just saw this Domingo Germán report, they're going to be guys in that tier that the Orioles, I think, should sign. And it's probably going to happen within the next week or so, obviously. And Orioles fans are going to be in an uproar. But I think the Orioles should sign 1 or 2 of these guys as to replace the Spencer Watkins, right? Spencer Watkins is gone. And when you look at Norfolk's roster, there's not that veteran guy down there. So as far as depth options, yeah, sign 1 or 2 of these guys, try to get them in AAA. So you got the emergency, because right now you're just looking at straight prospects who I love all these guys who are going to be in Norfolk's rotation. It's going to be deep. It's going to be high quality guys. It's going to be fringe top 100 prospects, but they're unproven. So you do need some veteran guys down there in Norfolk to help. You're going to need them at some point. It's a long season. But I just think at this point, as far as improving the major league rotation, at the beginning of the offseason, I probably would have said I'm okay with that. But at this point, it's just make the deal and let's go for the top. Let's go for the top guy and really improve this rotation, because you could piecemeal this thing together, right? If you stand pat, Bradish and Grayson at the top. Hopefully John Means gets you that 140, 150 innings. Kramer is Kramer again. And then you piecemeal it with Wells, Irvin, Hall, whoever in the 5 spot, plus some of these prospects making their debut. But then once you get to the playoffs, I think we're just right back to where we were last year, where the bats could do it, but the pitching is not going to get you through the first round of the playoffs.
Yeah, I think, Nick, that's a fair point. That if you want to go out and get, let's say an Eric Lauer to pitch at Norfolk, I think that's a perfectly reasonable move, and they are going to have to make 1 or 2 moves like that. I'll put this out in specific terms, though. Would you feel more comfortable with signing a free agent that's kind of the Michael Lorenzen mold, where you look at his year last year, he was an all-star, pitched really well for Detroit over the first 4 months of the season, then got traded to Philadelphia, struggled there, and I believe he was not even on the postseason roster for the Phillies. Would you prefer that the Orioles take a chance on a guy like that, or would you feel comfortable with Tyler Wells, stick him in the rotation at the start of the year and see just how far you can take him?
Worst comes to worst, yeah, I'll sign someone, even if it's like a Michael Lorenzen, just to have that in case of injuries. You don't know if John Means' elbow barks at him again and he's out. What if, I don't know, DL Hall is not going to cut it in the rotation during spring training? There's just too many things where you don't want to have to rely on like a Cade Povich, Chase McDermott early in the season. That would be kind of not ideal. So if they can't come up with a trade of some sort, I would definitely bring in someone. Just even if it's like, what's the guy that Boston signed that was with Cleveland for so long last year? It's on the tip of my tongue, but he pitched against the Orioles opening day, I think, or the day after. But yeah, even if it's someone like that, or like a super cheap deal or minor league deal, you're gonna have to bring in some extra arms.
Corey Kluber, I think you're
yes,
thinking of. He's
indeed.
out there.
Yeah, thank you, Garrett. Kluber. I mean, I would hold my nose and do it, but I think you gotta need some bodies at some point.
Yeah, I'm fine with bringing in some guy, even if just for competition, and see what happens. Just because, like, I know I've been very pro DL Hall should stick in the bullpen, but if you're not gonna, because again, he's shown that floor of being that elite late inning guy. But if you're not going to bring in anybody and you are going to use Hall in the rotation, like as much as I get on here and say Hall's a reliever, put him in the bullpen, he's your 8th inning guy. At the same time, I'm going to come on here and cry real tears of joy if we're sitting here in June, July talking about DL Hall, the starter, who's like shoving and actually being productive in that role because of the amount of energy that we have put into following DL Hall of these it's felt like a decade he's been in this organization. I want him to succeed in whatever role he can get in. But I will say, like, the fastball velo did increase late last year as he started working his way back. And he was able to increase or improve those secondary pitches and throw more strikes with those secondary pitches. He's got the curveball back. He's got a good slider. He's got a plus changeup. I vividly remember watching that changeup develop when he was down there in Bowie and that becoming a supreme strikeout pitch for him at the AA level as he was coming up. DL Hall's got the skills, I think, to cut it in the rotation. And honestly, like, he's going to be your best shot, I think. If you're not going to add anybody, that's your best shot, because I do agree with what Bob said that Cole Irvin is a little bit underrated. I think he showed great improvement at the end of last year, but I almost wonder if he's kind of optimized. You're going to get the most value out of him as that swingman role. Tyler Wells, like, just again, love the guy, but he hasn't shown for 2 straight years now that he can't finish a season. And you can't convince me that this big guy who's 29, 30 years old now is just suddenly going to throw 160 innings in your rotation this year. Like, Bruce Zimmerman is not an option in any way. He's just not. So, like, DL Hall is your best option if no one else is, if they're not going to bring anybody else. It's a good option, but still, that's a big question mark.
Jonathan Heasley season, baby. We traded for him for a reason. No. Yeah, DL Hall, that is the one, like, wild card. What if he is going to come in to spring training, win that job, and your top 3 is Bradish, Rodriguez, and Hall? I mean, that would be awesome, but I don't think you can count on it by any means. I think you come in and you let him stretch out, but ultimately you have to probably realize he's going to be in the bullpen. Tyler Wells, like Zach said, you could, in the beginning of the season, try to do it again first half and maybe plan it where you don't have to get to that dead arm period. You can kind of plan and at a certain point just shift him to the bullpen. I could see that, but I do think he'd be better just being in the bullpen overall. And I agree, Irvin ideally would be a swingman who can spot start here and there. Yeah.
Could you just
do it?
Could you imagine, though? Take a second and let's be super optimistic here. It's January. Could you imagine, of all franchises, all 30 MLB franchises, the Baltimore Orioles are the team that rolls out a rotation of 3. I'm going to consider Kyle Bradish homegrown because we basically developed into who he is. 3 guys of Grayson Rodriguez, DL Hall, and Kyle Bradish at the top of your rotation. Like that would be amazing. Long shot again. DL Hall's got the big question mark, but potentially, I don't know.
Yeah, Hall. There's no question that if you want to go on pure upside, Hall is your best option for the rotation. I think where I sort of find myself in conflict with that idea is that it's been a while since we've really seen him have a full healthy season. And I don't know, number one, how many innings you can expect out of him this season or how many innings you can get out of him going forward. And this is a short-term thing, and I may come back to regret this thought, but I kind of want an insurance policy for Craig Kimbrell. If Kimbrell just isn't getting the job done and Hall looks the way that he did late last year, he's now your closer. And I think that would be one of the best moves you could make. And Wells kind of in a similar camp because he has not gotten through that. I do think you could try it again and see if it works. But then if you have Wells in even a mid-inning role, that could do a lot of good for your bullpen depth. So that's one thought in my mind for why the Orioles should go get another starter is that bridge to get to the 9th inning and even in the 9th inning is a lot better if you have DL Hall and Tyler Wells in the bullpen.
Yeah. And two, with Hall, like, okay, maybe he's a 5 and dive guy. You know, I feel like just a couple of years ago, you get tagged 5 and dive guy, like that's got that pretty big negative connotation, right? He's a fringe starting pitching prospect. Now I feel like that's just baseball. So if you can get 5 DL Hall quality innings where the walk rate remains respectable like it was in the bullpen, I'm fine. I don't need DL Hall to go 7, 8 innings in his starts. But then that's where, you get into this situation of, is it going to tax the bullpen as this season progresses? I don't know. I just feel like the Orioles have the pieces to piecemeal this thing together. And maybe DL Hall does pop. Maybe Tyler Wells does keep that stamina up. Maybe Cole Irvin does take a step forward. Maybe John Means does. That's a lot of maybes. Not all of that needs to happen, but maybe 1 or 2 of those things does happen, and you can piecemeal this thing to the end or to the trade deadline, and then the trade happens. But I will say at least that the pieces are there for them to do that, if that's the path that the Orioles are ultimately going to take, and we have to wait till the trade deadline before the move is made.
But there's only so long and often you can kick the can down the road. Like eventually you're going to have to do something about the surplus at the Norfolk Baltimore level. It's not as like much of a rush as Orioles fans have thought ever since last offseason, but it's going to get here eventually. So yeah, I don't know. I'd rather just do it now personally.
Well, and as a reminder, we still got about 3 weeks of spring training, but the offseason in a lot of ways feels like it still hasn't begun. I mean, you have the reigning Cy Young Award winner from the National League still a free agent. Here as we're now pushing into late January. So still a lot can happen. And of course, we will be here to react to whatever does or doesn't happen. And we will be back next week. In the meantime, you can check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you can also head over to our Patreon community now and sign up at a paid level and have access to our daily Top 50 Prospects Countdown. We're rolling out a new episode every day. You're not going to want to miss that. And we're still fairly early into the list. Number 37 was just recorded earlier today, and we're still moving along there. Orioles on the Verge is part of the Believe Podcast Network. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge.